Hoops through life. Hoops through life.
Welcome to another episode of Hoops Through Life, a podcast where we discuss the women's basketball collegiate recruiting process and transition from high school to college. I'm your host, Elsbeth Bierman. Our guest today is Coach Marsha Frese. Marsha has experience as an assistant coach, associate head coach, and/or recruiting coordinator at Ball State, the University of Minnesota, the University of Maryland, Northern Illinois University, South Dakota State University, and the University of Illinois. She has experience as a head coach at the University of Missouri, Kansas City, and she is currently an assistant coach at Loyola University Chicago. Marsha, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to join you today.
All right, so what is the first thing you notice about a student athlete? What draws you in?
Wow, that's a really big question, really broad question. There's a ton of things that you pay attention to in the recruiting process. I think for me, what jumps out right off the page is the passion and motor, as we like to call it. Just a kid who has a lot of energy and really enjoys playing. Where I'm currently an assistant coach, Loyola Chicago, our head coach, Allison Guth, has come up, she's had this mantra for several years now, but really coined it with our team this year that I think kind of encapsulates the feeling. She calls it head, heart, guts, strength up the middle. And it's really kind of a simple way to make sense of the whole process of, do they have the head for the game? Do they play with heart, and do they have guts? And I think that's an amazing way of looking at it when you're sitting courtside, you really can see very quickly kind of the IQ of a player just through simple things. Do they get to a helpline? Do they understand spacing? Do they understand one more passing? The IQ comes across very, very quickly. Motor and energy is do they have the heart for the game? Do they have the passion for the game? And then just toughness. We always kind of joke in recruiting that you can always tell which kids played soccer or have played soccer because there's a toughness to those kids. So I think our mantra at Loyola Chicago, head, heart, guts, strength up the middle, is a really good indicator of what we look for in student athletes.
Yeah, with the soccer comment, I feel like just the way they run down the court, you're like, oh, they definitely played soccer.
But they tend to be the bruisers on the court, and they move very, very well laterally. So those kids kind of stick out very quickly.
You mentioned something about like the extra pass, the one more pass. I've talked to a couple AAU programs, and when I talk to the coaches before I'm speaking to the programs, most of them, 99% of them say, if you could address student athletes who just kind of hog the ball or want to shoot every shot. And so that seems to be like a big theme of student athletes thinking that they need to score X amount of times or whatever. Like what is your response to that idea?
Well, I've had a couple stints in my career where I've been out a season here and there, and I'll do different things. I coached high school boys one season, and one year I did actually help with a club team. And it was so interesting to me listening to parents talk about how many points such and such scored, or didn't score for that matter. And I'm thinking to myself, very rare, literally almost never have I sat courtside and recorded how many points a kid scores. If a kid is a prolific scorer, I mean, that without ever keeping stats. But I definitely do keep stats, especially in the summer, of how many passes a team makes before they will, get a great shot, or how many passes get made that aren't on target. That means missed opportunities, like the little nuances that come with basketball. I think what's challenging now is the things that make somebody a really effective college women's basketball player in particular doesn't show up on an Instagram feed. Some of the trainers that I know that are really high level trainers, I'm like, I know you guys are working on passing and things like that. Why are those not on your Instagram? And they're like, Coach, like nobody wants to see that on our Instagram. I'm like, I want to see it, So I think, I chuckle because I see a lot of the ball handling stuff, and certainly ball handling has its place in training and things like that. But almost without fail, unless you're a point guard, the first thing we say when a student athlete hits a college program is stop dribbling so much. So it's I just think there's a disconnect at times between maybe what people think we're looking for and what we're actually looking for when we're sitting courtside.
Yeah, there's a big difference between dribbling and ball handling. It's like,
A
how
100%.
effective are your dribbles? And I would also love to see a trainer post a video about passing. I would love to see passing drills. I mean, if somebody working out can hit 20 passes in a row, that's like perfect on the move or whatever it is, like that would be something to get excited about, I think.
We almost without fail here at Loyola Chicago do two simple things, whether it be the summer or the fall, kind of when new student athletes come in. We do two things. One, we'll stand them on the baseline and we'll give them a ball and we'll say, get to the other end of the court in 5 dribbles or less. And they're kind of looking at us like, what? And they realize you throw that first one out, you throw that second one out, you're at the other end in 5 dribbles. We're set, and we'll tell them. So you made it from baseline to baseline in 5 dribbles, yet you need 5 dribbles to go from the wing to the paint when you're coming off a ball screen. No, it doesn't make sense. The other one, Coach Guth is famous for is she'll line them up on the baseline. She'll have a ball on the baseline and a coach standing at half court, and she'll always say, "I got $10 for whoever can beat me to half court, basically." And they get ready and they take off a sprint, and she throws the ball to half court, making the point that the ball will always get there before your feet do. So if you can push the ball ahead and you can move the ball, it's a lot more efficient than dribbling it, a lot faster, and just being efficient with the basketball and what we're doing.
Yeah, and I just had this thought too. I wonder the influence that maybe like a trainer who's very famous, like you said, people who are really, really good, and they post certain content and it doesn't really show the maybe less sexy parts of the game. How does that influence the way that maybe trainers at the youth level decide to do their like structure their training because they're like, oh, this person is doing this, I need to incorporate that or this, and they may even miss the whole boat on a passing or more fundamentally driven workout for maybe somebody who is in like the 4th grade or the 5th grade or something.
100%. I mean, I think it's skills skills are progressional, we like to say. So when you're watching videos of young players, elementary players working on floaters and things like that, and you haven't mastered a 1-2 dribble pull up or just finishing a simple layup with an outside hand and inside hand, those skills should not be the next thing on your agenda. But I think it is very much the social media output. I think it's in part why some of the, just even the things I put out, I try to be as basic as possible. I mean, when we do a simple shooting drill at the college level, we know high school teams or club teams are looking for simple drills and things that could be effective without all the complexity and without being attached to a certain offense and things like that. So I certainly think there's an audience out there for it, but I think when you add some cool music and some flashes of light to a social media post, I mean, it's going to get views, but it's not always going to be effective in somebody's training.
So yeah, I think this conversation is kind of a perfect segue. So I went on a kind of a semi deep dive, or I guess a shallow dive on your Twitter account.
Very shallow, very shallow.
And I have, a few posts that I just love to talk about. All right. So one is quote, I adore players who know who they are and are not on the basketball court, end quote. Can you share like just like what that looks like to you as a college coach observing?
Yeah, I think you can always tell when I'm sitting courtside because the tweets start going. I think it's kind of what I just mentioned as far as like skills being progressional. It's also positions become progressional. I've watched more players than I can than count at this point who you can project from the time they kind of start high school to where they can get to by the time they end their college careers. And yet a lot of their training at the high school level is already geared towards them getting to that next stage of their progression when they haven't mastered the skills for the position that's going to get them a scholarship first. The game right now at every level has started to become very, very positionless, and where offenses are interchangeable, and you can play multiple positions, but you still have to know what you bring to the table and what you're great at, because that is ultimately what's getting you that whether it be a scholarship or an opportunity or a slot on a team, knowing what that is. I had a group of young players on our team in the gym just last week, and at the end of our workout, they were in theory all three in similar positions, and all three were recruited for very different reasons. And at the end of the workout, we were doing little one-on-one battles. And what we were talking about was you have to know what you're great at and how you can beat the kid you're facing. And so one of the things we talked about was why did you get recruited here? What do you think you do better than anyone in this group? And it wasn't an arrogance thing of, pound your chest and things like that. Because if I had asked the other two kids in the group, they would have told me without question what that kid did well, and vice versa. It's getting them to identify, this is what I do really, really well right now. This is why I'm here. This is how I got here. I got to bring that every day. And then our job in particular, along with their work, is to help them get to the next thing. I think when you get, whether it be as a high school athlete or a college athlete, when you are struggling through learning the new skills and things like that, you have to have that skill that you can fall back on and know that's what got me the confidence I needed. If I'm a great rebounder, if I'm an elite level rebounder, as I'm trying to become a very good shooter, I need to be always able to fall back on, I'm an elite rebounder. I'm going to go do that every single day until the other skill happens. But I think that's what the point of my tweet was, is a very long answer for that question. But the point of that tweet was like, know who you are and be in love with that as you work on the next things. I think trainers we're a little too fast at times. It's not just trainers, obviously, a little too fast at times to worry about the junior level college player when they're only a sophomore in high school. Like, get really good at something, be great at something as you learn and build on those next skills.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't care that if you wanted to go more, we could have gone longer on that answer, because I think that's an excellent answer. But so I guess when you're speaking, let's say you're speaking to like a 10th grader or 11th grader as they're going through the process, and maybe they ask you like, what do you like, how do you communicate that to a student athlete through the recruiting process, if you do?
No, I think we definitely do. Not to name drop, but years ago when we were recruiting, I think we figured this out really early in our careers about the recruiting process. I think kids, student athletes, high level student athletes who want to be great, want to be told the truth. And I'm not saying, in the get to know you process, you're like, your game is garbage. You need to do but they do want to hear the best players we've recruited over the years. They do want to hear the pros and cons of their game. They want to know how they're getting better. I will never forget at Maryland when we were recruiting Candace Parker in the early stages of her recruiting. She was an 8th grader at the time, 9th grader at the time. We realized very, very quickly that the more we told her about the deficiencies in her game, mind you, she's an 8th grader, 9th grader. It's Candace Parker. Even in 8th grade, it was still Candace Parker. But she responded to wanting to get better and wanting to learn. And I think we realized in the recruiting process, oh, this is different. This kid is different because she wants to hear, how she can be a better player. I mean, I think the good players really understand they're never a finished product. Obviously, delivery is a huge part of that and how you're delivering it as a coach. But I think there's still very much honest conversations about ways to improve and things they can be working on. And when student athletes are crossing back and forth between high school and club, they're constantly adapting their game as well for what those particular teams need from them. But helping them navigate, hey, when you're with your club team, like sharing the ball, that's awesome. That's a win for you. When you're with your high school team, you need to take over the game more. You need to be that kid, So I think those honest conversations are awesome. And for us, just as recruiters, it is a huge identifier for us, student athletes that want to talk about basketball and want to hear how they can improve their games and their overall leadership, for that matter, for the programs that they're competing for.
Yeah, and I think that also speaks, like you just said, like to their mentality, right? So if they take what you say, and then the next time you see them play, or whenever you see them play next, you can tell that they've internalized what you said, and they're making changes, then it's like, okay, wow, like I can really see the trajectory, or I really understand that this student is taking in what I'm saying, and willing to learn, and take in that feedback, and not just asking because they were told by somebody that you need to ask coaches what they think you're good at or something like that.
100%, 100%.
All right, so the next, so I only have one more tweet that
I was like, the tweets, they're gonna haunt me.
No, it's just one more. So, all right, so it's quote athletes, and then in parentheses, this is a lecture, not a lecture, just a tip. Your references are being written long before you ask for them, and you don't have to be perfect or the star to get a great one. Love writing references for hardworking SAs who are coachable, competitive, and great teammates, end quote. And so I love this tweet for so many reasons, but can you just share why you decided to write and post it?
It came up because obviously it's kind of reference writing season, the off season is when that always comes up. And, several years ago when I was a head coach at UMKC, winter break, we have nothing but time. It's the best time of the year for student athletes and their programs. But, instead of doing 2-a-days, and we would do a few of those over break, but I started doing just a series of different things. Some of it was team bonding. Some of it was, just kind of get to know stuff. But one of the exercises I did with the juniors over Christmas break was I asked them to write their own reference letter. I said, a year from now, you are going to come and ask me for a reference. If I had to write your reference right now, what would I write about you? And it was specifically for the juniors because obviously freshman, sophomore, you're not even thinking that way. Senior year, it's probably a little late at that point. Junior year, it's kind of the gold time when they're thinking about those things. If I had to write a reference letter for you, what would I write? Would I say you're a hard worker? Would I say you're consistent? Would I say that you're a great teammate? And, and it was an exercise for them of like, write your own reference letter. Would I be able to sign it? And it was a really thought-provoking thing, I think, for them, because it is. I mean, you're writing your reference letter every day. I think for me personally, I think back to my own college experience. I had a coaching change as a senior in college. So I really relate to student athletes that have to go through coaching changes and kind of all the emotions and feelings that go with that. For me, it was a really positive thing, the coaching change. But I do reflect back on that time and think, I think by my sophomore, junior year, I was probably getting a little jaded. There was some negative things going on, and I definitely wasn't the best version of myself. And when the coaching change happened, I just remember feeling a complete sense of relief that I could be anybody I wanted to be at this point. This new coach did not know me, did not have any preconceived ideas about me. I could be a new person. And I really took advantage of that opportunity. Still to this day, have a strong relationship with that coach that I literally only had for 1 year. But I do tell student athletes, I've worked in 7 different conferences at this point, and every time I go into a new university, I always tell the gals in the position group I might be handling, hey, if you were the kid who was never on time to workouts, I don't know that. If you were the kid who was never going to tough it through or weren't consistent, I don't know that. Here's your chance. And I think as you get older in life, you realize there's very few times that you get to have fresh starts in life and clean slates and kind of, start again. And I just love that in college athletics, you get those opportunities. But I think it is important for our student athletes to understand there is a world that's coming after their playing days are done. We can be their best reference. Obviously, if you're in a situation where you are not going to be able to give a quality reference for a student athlete, those conversations should be happening well before their senior year as well. But I just think it's a really thought-provoking way for student athletes to understand your reference is writing itself every single day, and your teammates could probably write it for you at that juncture as well.
Yeah, and I love that exercise that you had them do, the juniors do, because I think it shifts their perspective a little bit too of just like taking in an outsider looking into their life when they're typically the ones like looking through it. So I love that. And I also think because I think about like that at that level, yes, but then I also think about maybe a student athlete like going through the recruiting process, and I think of like you don't like how you do anything is how you do everything, right? And you don't have to be the best player on the team to have a good relationship with your coach and for them to say good things about you as your reference to college coaches as well. So that was another reason why I thought that was a pretty powerful tweet, at least to me. But kind of shifting gears back to like the more structured recruiting process. What are the classes that you're looking at? So like the July period's coming up very quickly. We're in July now. I don't know how that happened, but yeah. So like what classes are you looking at as you're going out this July?
Wow. All of them? No, I said it was a little frightening the other day. We were organizing our class of 2028 board, which is a ways down the road, but we are starting to peek at that. I think in a way we're really trying to in the era of the portal and more tournaments and more courts. I think in a way we're really trying to, narrow our focus. I mean, I kind of always, I've probably tweeted it once or twice too about you chase too many rabbits, you get none. So we are right now very, very focused on our 2025 class and, seeing where that will finish up for us come fall. But, we felt good about, as we headed into the 2026 class, so rising juniors. We had conversations with a huge chunk of them before the June 1 phone call even hit, as they were calling us, over the course of the last year and coming to games and things like that. So we always have an eye on what's coming, because recruiting is always a puzzle, so how we finish in 25 affects 26 and 27. So we do keep our eye on the ball with the class in front of us, but we are already looking at the next 2 to 3 classes for sure.
Yeah, so I kind of think about, and tell me if this is a correct analogy or not, but I think of it as like a funnel, right? So as they're younger, it's pretty wide. You're like, oh, I might like this kid, I might like that kid, and let's keep an eye on them. And then it like narrows down as they get closer to graduation. First of all, does that seem like a correct assumption on my part?
No, 100%, 100%. A lot of the young kids were tracking, caught our eyes for, like you said, head, heart, guts, strength up the middle. What they had one of those three, two, a couple of those things, and then we track them as they get older as well.
Yeah. So what are some of those things that can either keep somebody moving down the funnel or I don't want to say tossing them out, but like not being in the funnel anymore?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a fair question. I think number one, it's just development. It's continued progression. It's, not that everybody has to fit a quintessential position. But if, don't continue to develop physically, I think what's been helpful for me, like I said earlier, working in 7 different conferences, is every conference has a footprint, and a type, so to speak. Now, I will say it's a lot of fun to go against type at times, because it does give conferences problems. I just kind of reference my sister at Maryland. When Maryland first moved into the Big Ten, they were definitely against type. They were very up tempo, very athletic. They didn't have the size in the post, and they gave the league a lot of problems because their kids did not fit the type of that conference. So I think really it's a lot of continued progress and progression. We by no means expect them to be the finished product, but then also like evolving into, we Coach Guth, she's Ivy League background in her coaching. We run great schemes and things that have some complexity to them. So looking at a player's IQ is going to be important. You can adapt around certain kids if you have other kids around them, things like that. But I think it's finding the right fit for the overall puzzle that is going to be successful. Because for years, a couple years in my career, I worked for Kathy Bennett at Northern Illinois. Kathy Bennett is the daughter of Dick Bennett. Dick Bennett, the originator of the pack defense. We would bring in recruits and specifically wanted recruits to come to practice because we wanted them to see that we would spend 2 hours of a 2 hour and 15-minute practice on defense. If you didn't love defense and didn't want to play defense, that was not a good place for you to go. So, looking at kids, when you talk about that funnel, as they filter down that funnel, kids who will be successful in the system itself, so that, you're setting kids up for success while you're continuing to develop their skills.
Yeah, and I just want to mention, and I know other people have mentioned this, and I've mentioned this before, but I think it's worth repeating, is like what you just said, fitting into your system, the style, maybe what you focus on in practice does not mean if you don't fit that, that doesn't mean you're not good enough. It doesn't mean that you're not talented enough to play, maybe even in that conference or another conference. It just means you're not what like you're looking for at that particular time. Like you said, a puzzle, it's a puzzle, and trying to fit those pieces just right.
Well, no, and it's a great point. And, years ago when I was at UMKC, we made a conference switch to the WAC conference. And, I'd get obviously coaches calling, "Hey, coach, I got a kid who can play for you and play D1." And I would always say, because it was for us, the WAC was a completely different conference. It was very West Coast based, also had teams in Texas. So nobody had even seen really what the WAC looked like. And I would always say to the coaches, "Have you come to one of our conference games?" And obviously their time is valuable too, and it was difficult. But until you had come to a conference game and understood that we were not in the Summit League anymore, that just as you said, it isn't that your student athlete can't play Division 1. It doesn't even mean they couldn't necessarily play in our conference, but we were in such a different conference with such different skill sets. Were they going to be a good fit for that conference? And so it was a big part of trying to kind of get in synergy with some of the coaches of like, this is what, skill set is going to be successful in this conference.
Yeah, so kind of on this same line, but if you're no longer interested in a student athlete, how do you communicate that with them?
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of takes on a natural life of its own. I think if you're really down that funnel, near the end of it, it's definitely just an honest conversation of this is where we're at. This is how many scholarships we have. I think some of the recruiting, because there are so many offers, one thing I really adore about Coach Guth is that we don't overthrow out offers. People will describe it sometimes as like seats on a plane. You got to oversell the plane. Overselling the plane ain't fun. Those are all young women. They're all somebody's daughters. I think there's a rush sometimes to throw out offers. But because there are so many offers thrown out by schools, I think the student athletes themselves kind of navigate towards who they're really interested in. I think honesty is definitely the best policy. What has changed so much in the portal era is that you can genuinely offer a scholarship now to a student athlete, and come spring of a particular season, you don't have the scholarship anymore. And that is a real thing now, because of the portal, because the team will change within its own season. You have injuries, you have student athletes leave for whatever reasons. All of a sudden you're rolling into the spring and the off season. You realize we're really, not deep enough at a certain position. We are going to look at the portal for that position. Well, that invariably affects the class that you're recruiting. So those honest conversations are definitely being had and are necessary. And I think people are just now starting to figure out how the portal is affecting recruiting in general, all the way down through the high school level.
Yeah, and I think it's important for student athletes to ask that question. So it's like if you're interested in me and you offer me and I'm graduating, let's say I'm what are we in 25? Let's say I'm the class of 25. And it's like, it would be appropriate for me to ask, if you find somebody in the portal, will that offer still be available if I do not like take it or whatever? Like, is that an appropriate question to ask?
It absolutely is an appropriate question to ask. And honestly, sometimes the answer is going to be, I don't know, because it really has to do with the timing, and it has to do with the position. So, you could have offered out 3 scholarships, the point guard, the wing, and a center, and it's the wing that you lost during the season to some career-ending injury, and now it's the wing that you need to replace. So it's just not a perfect science at this point. I think that's why kind of the idea of really getting to know student athletes and vice versa, makes that process a lot more genuine and a lot more, just authentic, where you can have honest conversations about what's happening with your program and your team and kind of what direction you need to go that's going to benefit both parties.
Mm-hmm. And I think you may have kind of answered this, but I'll still ask it. So like, how does the portal affect you all and how you recruit?
Oh, I mean, it's just different. I think what has changed so much, um, just is the ability to keep experience on your roster. And I think college coaches, we're adapting like everybody else. I think if you polled most college coaches, they don't necessarily love the instant eligibility from a program building standpoint, but you certainly can't blame the student athletes for wanting that option. And if my daughter played basketball, I'd be all for it too. I mean, that goes without saying. But I think we're all just adapting to the idea that we can put more experience into our programs now. It's not that, we're a great case because we have a lot of freshmen. We really still do want high school players so that we can see their progression and watch them through the process. That's literally why we all coach, is to enjoy that development and maturity. But you do have, an obligation as well to put the best team on the floor that you can. And obviously that comes with experience. These last 2 years, as you've watched, not only teams utilize the portal, but just also the age of the women on the team because they got COVID years. I mean, you have 22, 23, 24-year-olds playing on a college roster now. And of course, the basketball is better. Anything that has more experience to it is going to be better. So it's now that what's the expression? The toothpaste is out of the tube.
Yeah.
It's not going back in. And you have to have some experience on your program. I think in a way, maybe underclassmen wouldn't necessarily look at it this way, but being surrounded by experience as an underclassman, at times they can develop quicker because they have players around them that can help them through the process. Also players around them that can cover up a lot of things that maybe they don't know yet. And I think that's where you see the benefit of having those balanced teams.
Yeah, definitely. So I had a DM exchange with a student athlete, and she had a couple questions. So I want to ask you those. So one of her questions was, what separates players who get offers from players who get recruited?
Position. I mean, overall skill sets. I kind of think it goes back to the tweet I talked about of adoring kids who understand what they're great at. Like when you sit in a room and you're talking about recruits, and say it's 3 or 4 kids in the same position, to be able to sit there as a coach and go, okay, this kid, they all can kind of do this, but this kid is going to bring this every single day. We have 2 really good young players right now, both very much specifically recruited in part because they were elite rebounding guards and forwards. And it's like what they've hung their hat on to be able to sit in a room and say, this is what they do great. This is what maybe they're not ready to do, but we will work on that. We'll build on that. Them knowing that they bring that to the table right away is honestly probably for us the difference between getting recruited and getting an offer.
Yeah, and I think this might be kind of maybe like next level thinking for a student athlete, but if you understand, because I mean the information is out there, right? If you understand the statistics behind winning and losing. So I love numbers. I love looking at like the statistics and things like that. So it's like you just mentioned rebound, it made me think of that. So it's like, yes, that rebounding is one of those tipping point statistics that can separate a win from a loss. And it's like understanding that, and that's informing how you're recruiting. It's like you might think rebounding is not a big thing, but it is a huge thing if you can do it at an elite level, at the next level. Also, I didn't mention this before. I didn't write it down, but I remembered it because I saw it on your Twitter was I don't remember the exact quote, but it was just like defending without fouling is like elite level defense. So like something like that too just made me think of that of being able to defend at the next level when it's not as much of a brawl as an AAU.
Well, and I mean, obviously at the college level now, when you're shooting free throws at 5 fouls, we talk about in practice, we track it. I mean, how many fouls what's the team foul count? I mean, and you see it sometimes in club, even when, a kid will foul out of the game and they don't even know they really fouled out. You're like, no, that's a team stat. For us this off season, we made a pretty solid jump from year 1 to year 2 in the A10. We did a deep dive this off season. What are the teams above us doing that we are not doing? What are we not good at? What do we need to improve on? One of the big glaring ones for us was rebounding. Teams that were above us, even a few teams that below us that beat us in the conference season, was because they out rebounded us. So it was not something that we were not going to address in the recruiting process. You can teach it for sure. You work on it, all that good stuff, but it's also something, they always say, what's the best way to work on rebounding? Recruit it. So that's what we did. We recruited it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, if you can find something and you don't necessarily have to teach it, you can teach other things that maybe are like next level of importance. Why not? All right, so this is another one of her questions. How can a student athlete best gauge a program's culture when they're going through the recruiting process?
Oh, that's a good one. That one's definitely a little harder. Honestly, I would tell a student athlete to come to practice, and really pay attention in practice. I think sometimes kids who come to practice, sometimes you look over, they'll be on their phones or whatever. I don't always know. And in a student athlete's defense, you don't always really know at that age what you should be looking for. That goes without saying. But I think if you come to practices, you will really pick up on some of the culture things. And I'll just tell you how, as a coach, in the seasons that I've been off, one of the things I like to do was go to people's practices. You never get to do that when you're actively coaching. So the seasons I've been out, that's what I've gone. And when I go to those practices or go to the games, I'm looking for interesting things. Are you at a practice? Like, are your student athletes tense? Like, do they have like, you can be focused and still have a looseness to you that is palpable. I think, coach practices where all the coaches are involved. It's not just the head coach's voice dominating, gives you a good key of the leadership. Are they secure in their leadership? Are they secure in letting other people lead in different areas? Just we do what we call energy exchanges between drills, where are the kids high-fiving a lot? Do they look like they're having fun? I know that's an interesting word at the college level, but it is still supposed to be fun. So I think kind of pulling back the curtain and just being a little more intentional about what you're watching, as opposed to the drills and things like that. I know when I watch games, I'm always noticing like the bench setups, and are the coaches talking to the kids and vice versa? Are the huddles like tight? Do the kids touch each other? Do they make physical contact in huddles and things like that? I think there's little giveaways that will tell you about the culture of a program if you're looking for those things, as opposed to just the overall direction of what is happening in a practice.
Yeah, I think those are all really great points. And totally agree with all of them. Another thing that I also encourage student athletes to do when they attend a practice is watch how the coach talks to the person you perceive as their least favorite player or somebody who makes a mistake, because that will be you at some point. And if you don't like how they're talking to them or interacting with them, you're not going to like it. You're surely not going to like it when it's you. But then on the flip side of that, how do they engage with the person who you perceive as their favorite player, somebody who does something well? Because that should be you at some point too. So just like little things like that. But also, I think it's great to point out, it's like just shifting the focus of not just watching drills, but watching kind of the things in between the lines there too.
Well, and I think you kind of nailed it. I think if how you're treated as a student athlete is based on your statistics, it's a really, really tough environment to be in. Everybody deserves to be coached, whether they're the first one on the floor or the last one off the bench. I think that's a pretty easy indicator of what's your environment that you're going to be living in day to day.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so let's kind of shift towards the transition to college. What are your expectations for student athletes once they get on campus?
Wow. I just think probably the biggest expectation for us when student athletes come in is just that they want to put in the work. Um, you know, again, we don't expect anyone we recruited, even the kids who are locked into their skill sets, to know that they're the finished product. I just think you got to come in now to college understanding it's a level of work. And I always hated that expression, like, especially in the NIL era of like, well, it's a free ride. And there is nothing free about playing college athletics. I mean, is it a sweet deal? Yes, it definitely is. I mean, I came out of college with no debt, but I gave up a knee, a shoulder, a few other body parts. It's definitely work. You got to be willing to invest in your own development, your own time.
So what do you think is like the best way for a student athlete to prepare academically and athletically for that first year?
Yeah, I mean, I think going into it knowing there's probably a lot you don't know, and being okay with what you don't know. I think the one thing we always say to newbies as well, we're not mind readers. So we don't do a good job of reading people's minds. And I think, for me personally, the older I get in my career, there's an age gap, so my daughter is now the same age as our freshman. So when I'm at home and I'm like, I don't understand what you're talking about, like trying to find that connection of like, okay, break it down to me in the simplest forms. I think what student athletes could really do to help themselves is two things. One, always be willing to ask for help. And it can be an assistant coach, it can be the strength coach, it can be whoever you want it to be. If asking directly to the head coach is too intimidating. But I think the cheat code, honestly, is on every program you have one, two, maybe multiple, depending on the program, juniors and seniors in particular who have it figured out. Our head coach, Allison Guth, really coaches in the affirmative. And what I always tell the newbies is I'm like on the sideline, I'm always like, she's giving you the cheat code. She is praising constantly what she wants to see. So if you're listening to her, do that because that's what she's looking for. I think, we just left a season where one of our fifth year seniors, Sam Gallinopoulos, was an elite level preparer. She was lived in the training room and she was always healthy. She had nutrition on point. She slept well. She prepared well. I mean, I think if you're a freshman, sophomore, and you are on a team and have seen the older kids that have it figured it out, be their best friend. Follow them around. Understand what they're doing. Ask them questions. Like, don't think you have to figure this all out on your own, and realize that you will get to where you want to go much quicker by bypassing mistakes that young players typically make. That find you an upperclassman who's got it figured out and become their little sister.
Yeah, I love that. So I have the last couple questions that I ask every guest, and I actually changed one of the questions this morning, and I know I sent you them, so I hope that's okay. But it's what
Let's
book
wing it. Let's
oh
go.
yeah, what book or podcast would you recommend every incoming first year read before their first season begins, and why?
Oh, I mean, podcasts is so hard because there's so many. And it just depends on my mood of like what you actually, it was like, what's it for? You said it something very earlier that made me think of it. I'm obsessed with Malcolm Gladwell,
Mm.
and the two books that really hit it for me was called Outliers, and his other one called Tipping Point. And the gist of Tipping Point is just that there's always a point that you get to that things then go over the top. You think of rolling a boulder up a hill, get to the top of the hill where then it goes down. And I think the analogy of a college player is like they're rolling that rock up the hill. There's always a tipping point that they figure out how to get that boulder moving downhill. And it's not that they're in coast mode, it's they understand how to take care of their bodies. They understand, the sleep they need, the work they need. You actually get upperclassmen who are like, I'm overtraining, coach. I need to dial, like, yes, like there's a tipping point. That book in particular for me, because I think when you're grinding away at something, it's hard to sometimes see that you're actually moving the needle. I don't even remember the book years ago that I read. Oh, yes, I do. Peaks and Valleys. I think that's also another great one. There's a quote in that book that says, you never know when you're halfway up a peak or halfway down a valley. Are you going up or going down? Like, you never really know until you're out of that valley of understanding that the entire college experience is going to be a series of peaks and valleys. And the more you can kind of stay at level ground with your mood, with your attitude, with your work ethic, the more likely you're going to stay at those peaks a lot longer during your experience.
Yeah, I love that. All right, so this is the new question. If you could snap your fingers and change one thing about the recruiting process, what would it be?
Oh, probably how quickly it occurs sometimes, how fast of a process it is. I miss there used to be a sequential order to the process, and I don't miss it just because I like order and consistency, but there used to be a process of like, we would talk to them and they would come on, and then we would go into their homes, and then they would it's all kind of jumbled and sped up at different times. I miss home visits. One of my favorite parts of the recruiting visit was visiting a student athlete's home. I just think that seeing a student athlete's posters on her bedroom wall and who she's idolizing, and the stuffed animal that's sitting on the bed, like that was always like, oh, like I love that part of it. I think it's sped up a lot more nowadays. I think it's really, as I mentioned, my son is a 2030. We're still a couple years away from, signing that class. But I think when you're seeing offers already out to 2028s, I can't even fathom that you're thinking about college when you still got a Buzz Lightyear backpack on your back. It just doesn't equate for me. Like, slow down. We got some time.
Yeah. What an image that is. Yeah, that's funny. All right, last but not least, any final words of wisdom?
I guess what I would just always, I try to live my life and my career and my personal life just with two excuse me, two keys for me is always being consistent and being adaptable. And I think student athletes, if they can find a level of consistency to their work, to their mood, to their mindset, and still understanding that as consistent as you need to be successful at the next level, there has to also be a willingness to adapt to the changing landscape, a different team, different teammates, different coaches, everything that's going to be thrown at you. It's all just one big adventure as you're going through this. And I think the more you can try to stay even kiltered of like, all right, today's this is what's happening. Let's roll with this. I think the more likely you are to find success through the process.
Awesome. And if anybody wants to keep up, I'm sure everybody's going to want to keep up with you on Twitter because of all the tweets that I just said. But if anybody wants to keep up with you or find out more about Loyola Chicago, where can they find you all?
Loyola Chicago at Ramblers Women's Basketball. So at Ramblers WBB, at Loyola Ramblers is our athletic department. Our head coach, Allison Guth, at Coach Guth, CoachGuthluc. And what am I? I'm at Coach Frese, much to the anger of my sister,
Yeah.
Brenda. Sorry, got there first.
That's very funny.
I love it.
Yeah.
She can't have the name back. It's already taken.
All right. Is there anything else you want to promote about Loyola Chicago? Any events or anything like that?
No, I mean, we love to have people up to Loyola Chicago. We jokingly refer to it as the resort on the lake. It's an unbelievably special place. I'm really, really proud to be a part of the organization and the leadership. So much so that my daughter is going to be enrolling here this fall, and I'm just like floored and blown away that she found her future home, and I get to kind of have a backseat to it for the next 4 years.
Oh, that's pretty cool. That's awesome.
Yeah, I was gonna break out in that Loyola mom t-shirt courtside, but I was like, might be a little cheesy, but it still works.
Well, Marsha, I really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for being here.
Of course. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for listening. If you're looking for more specific recruiting advice based on your situation, head over to hoopsthroughlife.com today to schedule your free 30-minute strategy session with me. We will discuss where you currently are in the recruiting process, where you want to go, and create a plan to get you there. Again, that's hoopsthroughlife.com, hoopsthroughlife.com. And if you have any questions for me or questions you want me to ask future guests, you can email me at l@hoopsthroughlife.com. That's EL@hoopsthroughlife.com. I look forward to hearing from you soon.